What has driven our customers to look into the topic of cloud?
We certainly know that our customers have been moving to the cloud for many years and for various reasons. Especially in manufacturing, we still see that there is naturally a gap between central IT and perhaps production IT. And if you now consider we have flexibility, cost, globalization, technology availability, which are typical cloud drivers, how do you think this projects onto production IT? Can you say something about that?
Yes. So the central IT of our company has indeed engaged with the topic of cloud, built landing zones, conducted cloud enablement, and increasingly deployed workloads to the cloud, also replacing various existing data centers and migrating to the cloud. Or some of our customers are currently still dealing with it. In production IT, this change is also slowly being experienced, but perhaps from a different motivation as well. I think what we are currently seeing with the customers we talk to is the motivation that comes with the changing workforce as new, younger employees join the company. There is also the change in production lines, as they are to be more automated, digitized or altered, or new production sites are to be developed. This requires addressing the question of what is actually happening in production today. And one of the essential drivers in the transformation to the cloud environment in IT was indeed the topic of transparency and visibility, to find out what is actually currently running, for example, in the data center, or in this case, in my production and operations, to identify, find, and transform the famous Excel macros that perhaps keep production running efficiently in one line or another today in various ways. To modernize, okay.
There is this relatively well-known public case of Volkswagen's move of production IT to AWS from 2019. Can you say something more about it, perhaps how what you just mentioned relates to it?
I find that especially in the automotive sector and specifically Volkswagen, it might be quite interesting for many manufacturing customers as an example, as there was a strategic partnership established in 2019 with AWS, Amazon Web Services. And the objective was essentially to easily digitalize production at various locations and use the cloud in a way to make it more digital. And one of these drivers was certainly the topic of transparency, essentially tidying things up a bit. But another interesting driver here for many is the concept or modernization that is implemented in the company, which can also be transferred to another production site. So quite simply, reusability.
Reusability through the cloud. Certainly an exciting point when you consider that plants are often like small principalities, as mentioned earlier, often isolated in terms of IT. Now, not only is this being broken up by the cloud, but fundamentally, whenever someone mentions the cloud, someone always brings up security. How do you think this relates to the topic, specifically IT security and security concerning cloud computing in production?
Yes, many of our customers are currently also dealing with the topic of NIS2 and the topic of critical infrastructure. It is, of course, the case that originally the idea was, and we have also experienced this in IT, that many companies thought their own data centers naturally have the highest security standards. And what has also been observed over the years in the consulting projects with the customers we have supported is that the main advantage actually provided by public cloud providers is that they bring very high security standards, which actually exceed the security standards of typical data centers, and are also above the security standards typically present in the production environments of our customers. This means our customers can gain a significant benefit if they also advance this cloud transformation on the shop floor, especially regarding security.
Okay, when I listen to you, one could say that the production IT, meaning the overall cloud penetration, is not quite as high, perhaps in manufacturing, as it could be. Do you think that production IT is still lagging behind, or is it simply a fundamentally different world, decoupled from the West?
I have observed with some customers that production IT is indeed leading when it comes to cloud transformation, but perhaps a larger portion of customers, maybe about 2-3, are making this move somewhat later than central IT. This is mainly because centralized structures were present in the past regarding IT, and now one can naturally benefit from the fact that central IT has perhaps already fundamentally dealt with the topic of cloud, and a certain cloud enablement is available, and now there are simply opportunities for infrastructure, for example, to utilize internal resources for the topic of network and security, and the discussions are no longer as complicated as we experienced perhaps 7 or 8 years ago.
Okay, so higher reusability of IT from production, from the production lines of 2001 and other parts of the network. You mentioned it, it's a very, very popular topic when talking about production, and availability can actually be considered solved, right?
There are now various ways to naturally ensure and also back up network applications towards the internet nowadays. What we typically see with our customers is that it's no longer typically an issue because either mobile backup is available for the existing fiber optic connection or leased line connection. We have the topic of satellite internet through various providers, which essentially offer a good backup, allowing for double or triple backups when it comes to internet connectivity. And one must also naturally ask if, for example, no connection is possible to Frankfurt over all 3 existing internet connections, where perhaps my workloads are running in the cloud, whether the problem is not so significant that it might not even make sense to consider advancing local production. But perhaps to add to that, of course, from the perspective of critical infrastructure, it is naturally a topic that there must be certain workloads that can simply continue to run locally for a certain period of time. But even there, this point has also been addressed through various cloud edge services, which are now offered or can be used to ensure that I can continue my production for a certain period, even quasi-offline if necessary.
Okay. We have seen over many years that many companies have moved to the cloud, some more, some less. There were often indeed the typical cloud advantages that were briefly mentioned at the beginning. Now it seems that one might think that we observe, especially when data is in the cloud, that one benefits even more from it when projecting it onto production IT. How do you see that?
Yes. So I believe this is a trend that also started there in various company areas. This realization that one could perhaps integrate data into the central data lake to essentially create central data workloads and provide them to others. Also, this idea of moving from the data lake to a data mesh in 2001 and somehow making it available to others. And we see the same in production IT as well. As of today, we naturally have a lot of IT and data that might be stored under the desk or somewhere in production, in a server, a data center near the production, and also analyzed to determine KPIs for efficiency, for example. We now have a significant advantage when we integrate the data into the cloud, as we can naturally also provide this data to others and implement workloads that go beyond simple efficiency analysis. Of course, I can also do the classic dashboarding from the cloud with this data that I have integrated there, but I could also provide it to third parties and in principle gain insights into production. For example, when considering AI and predictive maintenance, I can naturally use this data in my production line and also provide it to others.
So could one say that the companies that are already in the cloud are now benefiting from the AI wave that is currently happening because they already have this touch point and can also use the technology from the cloud in production?
Yes, I believe it can be greatly simplified by saying that one part is essentially getting all this telemetry from production into the cloud. This is a significant step, and I am convinced that it is a step every company should also take. And that is essentially the enabler from my perspective, to be able to map further control steps in production later and to make all these insights and additional automation, which I can also achieve with AI, essentially usable. Since I already have an edge device, which is essentially cloud connected, on the production line, I can naturally also consider whether to deploy an AI workload back into my production line. A current example that we are increasingly discussing is from the quality assurance area, specifically topics related to visual inspection. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel yourself. Instead, it makes sense to use existing models that a technology provider, a cloud technology provider, brings along, which I can then perhaps also reuse on the edge.
Now, you already mentioned earlier the most critical production IT of all with Excel macros. How do Excel macros fit? And how does that fit into the new world with cloud computing? And in what way do we partially replace an Excel macro in production with Google Workspace? Do you have any considerations perhaps on the subject matter of citizen development when you look at the idea of web-based development in production in particular?
Yes. Well, I believe we will always experience, and I think this is also one of the great strengths, that we have experts who drive automation themselves, like on the shop floor. I think the topic under the name citizen development is one of the essential components. And of course, it will change. It is then no longer the Excel macro, but perhaps another automation technology with which the workloads can be implemented or tasks can be executed. I think the big benefit, and that is indeed the question, is what changes with the topic of cloud, the topic of governance. I am now gaining transparency into what is happening at that point. And I have the opportunity to at least centrally specify certain rules regarding which services are used, how these services are used, and which security standards I want to enforce there.
Okay, so if we're already talking about Excel macros, we're talking about another heavy legacy system in production in the area of connected products. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yes, it naturally also affects our manufacturing customers in this regard. Our customers in the field of machine tools, of course, also produce such machines that come with a connectivity stack. And I believe that this is, of course, a great benefit for our customers who are currently setting up a new production line and essentially acquiring new machines. But let's look at reality. Most of our customers have had such machines in their production lines for over 5 to 15 years. This means that the topic of retrofitting is a permanent issue. And in the current discussions we are having about it, it is completely understood and has become entirely normal to say, I have existing machines that I need to modernize, or PLCs in my production that I need to modernize, and to establish this connection somewhere which is essentially cloud edge and serves as the gateway, if you will, towards all services and data integration into the cloud.
Okay, so cloud in production is by no means a no-go anymore. Some have already done it. We know from good experience that there are even cloud-native plants. How do I start? Call to action. So if I'm now standing in front of production and getting started, I know I have to do something. What do I do?
Yes, I believe that on one hand, the question is still certainly about the topic of cloud enablement, but from the perspective of what I can tackle first, I would look at how I can essentially make a breakthrough towards the cloud. I believe this is a very interesting exercise for the organization to find out if there are still any reservations at this point, or if there are any questions that still need to be addressed. And it can be relatively easy to convince someone that I essentially have services that I can use and also provide data in a simple way.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much for the conversation you sent.